Hey everybody, hope you're doing great. We're here to talk about New Year, New Sword, which is the New Year's event for this year with Nikke got us a victory. And I say this year, I mean the year of 2023. Yeah. I guess like 2024 New Year, because it is New Year. Anyway, this one focuses on Scarlet and her alt. And then, so we're going to talk about this event, and then we'll do Scarlet, Black Shadow, or Shadow... Yeah, Scarlet Black Shadow. And then we'll do Red Hood, because Red Hood, as in the story last week, her Bond story takes place within there. And so does Chimes and Crown, because that's like the only time they interact with the commander. But we'll do theirs when we do their event, Lost Kingdom. And Chime came out much more recently. Like, Crown came out during that event. I don't know why they didn't release Chime at that point, but they didn't. But we're going to... we're just going to cover Chime and Crown during that event. Okay, so the New Year's event begins. It's like New Year. It's almost New Year's. It's like New Year's Eve, and there's a huge concert being conducted. And Noise is in her fucking gotcha outfit, which is like amazing, so fucking hot. And then there's a whole bunch of squads there. Not all of them, but it's like, look, everyone's here. The Counters and Aegis and Cafe Sweetie. No, Made for You. And a bunch of others, not everybody obviously. And then as the concert's going along, Noise comes down, hands us a rose, and gives us a kiss on the cheek, and that causes the Counters to freak out because everyone wants some of that commander dick. And so we're like, oh, we're gonna go take a break. And so we run off to get some air, and we're walking around in the park when we run into Scarlet, and she's like, oh hey, I came to drink at the Ark because I didn't want to drink alone, and I figured I'd run into somebody here that I knew. And we're like, okay. And we're like, wait, so you're just in the park drinking alone? And she's like, well, I heard the concert music and I got distracted and stopped and stuff. And then at that point we get a message from Rappy, and it's like, run. Everyone's found out that Noise kissed you, and now there's like complete chaos. Now everyone wants like kisses or something. And we're like, Scarlet, like, oh, you want to go watch the sunrise with me? And then we can have a drink? That's like a thing people do to bring in the new year. And we're like, sure, sounds good. And so we're like, she's like, the best place to do that, of course, is going to be on the surface because there's no real sunlight here. And we're like, okay. So we head up to the surface, and then she mentions that, I'm like, okay, cool. So here? And she's like, no, it's 2 hours away. Let's get walking. We're like, okie dokie. She then notices the flower we're carrying around, the rose, and she's like, oh, I like it. It reminds me of my sister. And you're like, oh, you had a sister? And she's like, yeah, her name was Rose. And we're like, you remember all that, but I thought you've had like 15 mind switches or whatever and lost all your memories. And like, cause that's the whole thing with Pilgrim, is they've had so many mind switches, most of them like barely remember anything about going on besides themselves, and they need to kill the queen. And so she's like, oh yeah, but for some reason that's the one thing I can always remember is my sister and like what happened around that. She then asks if we've ever heard of the Melee Squad, and we're like, no. And she's like, well, we got a couple hours, let me tell you a tale. So we go all the way back to the beginning of the invasion, which is like 100 years ago, and there was a squad, like a prototype squad of mass-produced Nikkes that were all mass-produced to be melee fighting Nikkes, and there was 10 of them altogether, which included Rose and Scarlet, who are sisters. And that's one of the things they delve with in this, is that normally you remember everything about your previous life or nothing, but the only thing they remember is that they were both sisters. So that's like an interesting thing. We then see Rose and Scarlet dueling. And this is the old school Scarlet from the like Red Ash, for example. And they've been sparring. This is like they're almost on their like 1,000th sparring match. It's like 987 or something, and they have like 10 draws and then like 975 like losses for Scarlet. So Rose is clearly the better fighter in this whole situation, and she takes the whole thing very lightly as well, which pisses Scarlet off because she's trying to like get good. We then learn that Scarlet is excellent at cooking, cleaning, and being organized, which is something Rose is not. So we get some interesting insight, because like the modern day Scarlet, even the Scarlet of like Red Ash, it's much more of like a slob and stuff, but clearly she got some of those traits from probably a mind switch after this event with Rose, because she used to be much more disciplined and stuff, and as like mind switches occur, she becomes much more like drunk, obviously, as well. They chit-chat about that, then they get called into a meeting, and they meet this officer, this lieutenant, who's complaining to somebody else about how he has to be a commander, and he doesn't want to do it, and how that fucking mercenary, like the legendary commander, is like ruining everything for everyone, and whatnot. And then the girls all arrive, the 10 of them, and they find out that they're going to be deployed finally because they've just been training this whole time. And the reason why is because the Goddess Squad has been so successful. So now it's like, okay, let's try some other squads. And now instead of just sending Nikkes out by themselves, they're going to send them out with commanders because clearly that has some sort of effect. And then he makes Rose the squad leader because out of all their simulations and trainings and stuff, her scores are the highest. So then the next day, Rose and Scarlet talk about Lilith a little bit while they're traveling to their meeting. Rose is like super infatuated with her. She's so amazing and beautiful. And she also fights melee. She fights with her bare hands, which is impressive. And that's probably why they're testing out this melee squad, because it's like, well, Lilith is really good, so maybe this will be a good thing for everything. And we find out that the melee Nikkes are made like much less durable, but they're much faster and quicker. And then they talk a little bit about how Lilith must have been scared the first time she fought a rapture, but now she is like a true goddess and whatnot. And then they talk about how they're kind of scared about this whole thing. So once they arrive to the location, they infiltrate into the higher floors of this building, and they see a whole bunch of raptures. And everyone in the squad just like freaks out. They all freeze. They all start talking about like, what the fuck are we doing? We're going to die, like something, yada, yada. And then Rose starts mocking their fear, being like a good squad leader, and is like, whatever, y'all, I'm going to go. And then she like hops down and starts just killing the shit out of the raptures. And then while she's doing it, she taunts Scarlet for being a little bitch, and so she joins, and then all the rest of the squad jumps down there, and then the whole mission ends up being like a resounding success. So then we get like kind of like montage essentially, where it's like they continue to have like resounding success after success. They're racking up wins. They're making a huge name for themselves. They keep being rumors that if they keep doing this, they'll become like a named squad, like the Goddess Squad, and they'll get like upgrades and a lot more support and all this stuff. Instead of just being like mass-produced Nikke Squad A, for example. Let's see, better equipment. And then they'll be able to, they also talk about how like once they become like an official designated squad, they'll be able to like call in requests or help other squads and whatnot. So at some point, they go and talk to Lieutenant, who doesn't want to be called commander. He wants to be called lieutenant, and he is a super asshole. Like, he was an asshole before, but now it's even more like of an asshole, to be honest. They are complaining because they're like, hey, we're running out of supplies and all this stuff. And then he tells the sisters to work harder, and once they receive, because if they can work harder and receive recognition, then they'll start getting supplies and stuff. So they continue to gain more success and become more renowned and all this stuff. And then one evening, they're just like sitting after a mission, and they're drinking with everybody, and they're talking about all the squad mates and how they've just all been talking about their plans for the future. Like, one lady just wants to like lay in a blanket, another lady wants to like be a school teacher or something. And then Rose asks Scarlet what she wants, and she's like, I want to fight you and win. But I want to fight naked. And then they also talk about how this is where they talk about like the Nikkes don't remember anything, but they remember that they're sisters. And then Rose mentions they must have either like super loved each other or hated, like been super irritated. She doesn't say hate, but disliked each other, been super irritated by each other, because that memory was like able to sustain even after the process and everything that went down. They then talk about how they're all going to survive and do great, and then in the next New Year's, they're going to sit together and they're going to drink with the whole squad, and that she has some sake she brought. And they drink a little bit there, and she's like, oh, it's bitter. And then Rose is like, I got this like super good sake that we'll use this next year, and in 1 year it'll be even better, because, you know, alcohol gets better over time to a certain extent. And then we switch back to the present, and there we with Scarlet are like, we found like the hill that she wanted to like watch the sunrise and drink and all that stuff. And so then we chat with her, you know, in the present. It's like, oh, so things sounded pretty good. So what happened? Because clearly things didn't go well, and Rose is not around. And she's like, well, you know, no good things can last forever, and things eventually kind of turn south. Because obviously there's no melee squad anymore. She then tells us they were good and they were successful, but at the end of the day, they were still mass-produced Nikkes, and so they still had like all the intricacies of, you know, the problems that occurred with that. And so they started to lose their numbers. There was like one person got mind switched, another person died, another person got like crushed under a building. At some point, Scarlet's legs stopped working when like a building was exploding, and so Rose had to like drag her out of there. And eventually, there's only 6 of them left, including Scarlet and Rose. And that they needed supplies because they were like, they needed repairs, and like they were like out of food, so they were gonna like starve. And then if they starve, like the likelihood of mind switches is higher and all that stuff. And so I decided to go talk to Lieutenant again, who just blows them off completely. He also mentions that there's another mission coming up. And then right before they leave, he's like, hey, Rose, you stay, I need to talk to you alone. And it's like, okay. Later on, Rose meets up with Scarlet, and she's like, hey, I want to rebel and kill this guy. And like, you know, we need to like show them that we need supplies, otherwise we're not going to continue and things aren't going to work out. And this next mission we're going on is a suicide mission. Like we're all supposed to die on it. And so they argue about that because Scarlet's like very honorable, and she's like, no, that's not our job. We're not going to kill humans. Like our whole job is to protect humans and yada yada. And then Rose mentions that she's already asked the other 3. Oh, wait, there's 6. There's 2. Oh no, the other 4, and that 2 of them are like, yes, let's rebel, and 2 of them are like, no. And so if Scarlet chooses not to rebel, then they have a tie, and then what are they going to do? Because Rose is like, I want to rebel, and so Scarlet's like, no, I refuse. And it's like, why? And then Scarlet gives some like hard truth. It's like, okay, maybe we rebel, but maybe we get some of the supplies, but then we're going to be branded traitors, and then what's going to happen? We're going to be hunted down. Like we're only mass-produced Nikkes, so like no one gives a fuck, right? We're going to be despised and all this stuff. And then Rose is like, all right, well, I'm going to go tell the others what's going to happen, and then you go ahead and prep for the mission tomorrow. And it's like, okay. So a bit later on, Scarlet's just like hanging out, looking at like the sunrise or something, and then she checks on the booze for like the New Year's event, and she's like, okay, cool, it's still there. Thinks about how they're gonna all drink together and all that stuff, and then she hears someone call her name, and she heads out of the room, and she sees one of her squad mates bleeding out on the ground, and then there's 2 others standing nearby, and then the dying one says that Rose has gone off to kill the lieutenant. So Scarlet's like, you guys don't move, I gotta go stop her, and they're like, no. So then they fight. We then go back in time 2 hours to the meeting with Rose and the lieutenant, and he confesses to her that the whole squad, they're all prototypes, and that the whole point is to push them, see how far you can push them, and then when there's only one left, they're gonna like give that person like a Grimm's model body, and then put them in like the goddess squad, right? And so Rose and him kind of go back and forth a little bit because she's like, wait, only one? And then he gets super mad that she keeps questioning him about stuff. And then he gets mad because this whole assignment like has dragged on way longer. Like he was essentially given this assignment, been like, hey, push these guys until they all die, and then when there's one left, you'll be promoted and she can go off, and then you can go do something else. And this is like, he's super mad because he just wants them all to die so he can move on with his life, and he's get this promotion and do all this other stuff. And this is supposed to be like an easy job, but they're making it so hard because they're too good at their jobs and all this stuff. And then she's like, well, why? What? I don't understand. And then he talks about how the melee squad, they cost too much to maintain, and that they're too vulnerable, and that the mind switch thing is an issue because they're much higher likelihood to be like have mind switches and all this stuff, and it's just not worth it. But like one would be worth it because they invested this time, but like none others. And then Rose decides that no matter what, she's going to protect her sister. Okay, and so now we go back to like the present, but instead of being with Scarlet, we're with Rose, and so she's thinking about all this stuff that occurred and how she set the other 2 Nikkes on that one, and then she's like, all right, I'm gonna go take care of this motherfucker. And so she goes in there and like says some stuff to him, and then just massacres him. Meanwhile, Scarlet was able to beat the other 2 and is racing to the lieutenant's office. When she gets there, she finds Rose all alone, covered in human blood, and there's also like the 4th member, so like all the melee units are dead except Scarlet and Rose. And then they go back and forth about Rose about killing a human and all this stuff, and how'd you do it? And then Rose was like, it was actually quite easy. I just put like a red cloth over my face and just pretended I was fighting raptures, and just went hog wild and killed everybody. And then their squad mate got killed because she like jumped in the way and all this stuff. And so now they have to duel to the death because Scarlet's like, this is unacceptable. You're a traitor. You like fought against mankind and all this stuff. And at some point, Scarlet's like, I don't want to do this. I don't know if I can fight you. And then Rose is like, that's fine. I'll wait till you're ready. But until then, I'm just going to put this thing over my face again, and I'm just going to massacre human beings until you come stop me. Or I'm just going to kill everything in the way. And then at some point, Rose like makes fun of Scarlet. Oh no, then we get like a flashback to when they first became Nikkes. And like, Rose is like teasing Scarlet because she talks like it's the Middle Ages, like with these and thous and stuff. And she's like, what happened to you? You didn't speak like that. And then Scarlet's like, I know not whence thou speaketh or something. And then Rose is like, must have been some fucked up thing that happened when you became a Nikke. Kind of got messed up in your brain or whatnot. And so then we go back and they're fighting, and eventually Scarlet like beats Rose, but can't like follow through with the killing. Like she has knocked Rose's sword out and has her sword to her chest and doesn't move. And then Rose like chides her and tells her she needs to be stronger, and then grabs the sword and shoves it through her, like cutting into her core, killing her. And then as Rose dies, they hold each other and they talk, and Rose like is like, don't ever let anyone control you, Scarlet. Be your own person. And then she mentions that nothing is meant to last forever. And then we go back to the present, and Scarlet explains that afterwards she took her sister's sword, which should have been chipped and broken, but it wasn't. And then she like also took her core, and then she hid, right? So instead of being like, I am the last, I am, like Highlander, I am the last one, they're the only one. She hid. So that implies heavily, and I don't know if I've ever read anywhere this contradicted, that Scarlet, even the current Scarlet, is like a mass-produced Nikke still. And so like Aid and like Rappy, she just like powered through and just continued to like be super strong. I don't know. It seems like Rappy may have gotten like some upgrades at some point, but we'll get to that in the future. But anyway, we haven't got to either of those characters yet, but it's interesting because I was like, oh, interesting. Let's see. So then she hid, and the uniformed government came, and they thought everyone died, and so they took what they wanted and left. And then Scarlet came out and like buried everybody, and eventually she hooked up with the Goddess Squad, and then there was a blacksmith. Remember, because all the mind switches, so no one I don't think they remember Snow White was a blacksmith, but she was able to combine. So Small White was able to combine Scarlet's sword, which is like something feather, with, or not Scarlet, Rose's sword with her core, right? And that's the sword that Scarlet still uses to this day. So back to the present, we're drinking some tea. Oh, no, sorry. We're drinking the sake, and then we ask her if she's still bitter towards anyone, and she laughs and talks about how, like her sister said, that time erases all things. It erases bitterness, remorse, etc., etc. They drink some more, and then the sun comes up, and we all enjoy it together. She asks how the first drink of the new year is, and we're like, it's pretty bitter. And then she laughs and says, kind of like life. Later, Scarlet visits her sister's grave, and there's a rose that's blossomed on it. So she talks about how she finally had a New Year's drink with someone. So it's been 100 fucking years she kept that sake so she could drink with somebody on New Year's Day, right? So, and that was us. So the drink the literal drink she was supposed to have with her sister and her squad mate, she had with us. And then she talks about how that's why it was so bitter, and that maybe next year, like she already misses drinking with us, obviously, and then maybe next New Year's we can like drink together, and she'll bring the good stuff. And she thinks about how she took, this is where we learned that she took the sword, and that Small White was able to combine it with her core and kind of fix it up, and that it's lasted like 100 years. And then Scarlet talks about, like at the grave, how she misses her sister and that hopefully someday they can meet again and be sisters again. And then she recites this nice poem, and then we get this like nice outro video.
Let them fly in the air, say we love the world. My Scarlet stands with the day, when the nature stands, it will shine
All right, that was fun. So let's do Scarlet Black Shadow's Bond story at this juncture. So this takes place during the kind of like Red Ash little side event story. There's the part where Scarlet gets introduced as like, hey, we found this chick. She's going to join our party and whatnot. And then she's like, I refuse to join you unless I get beat in a duel. And then Lilywise just knocked like One Punch Man's the fuck out of her. And then, so this, after that, she comes to, and Lilywise is introducing her to everybody, and Rapunzel and Snow White are like, hey, welcome to the team, and Doro and Red Hood are very skeptical about her being on the team, especially Doro, who is like, we don't need any more people, we're fine without her. And then Scarlet goes back and forth with them about like, I don't believe that was a correct duel. I said I was going to duel you, and you didn't duel me, you just surprised me, so I wasn't able to like, that wasn't a real duel, it didn't count. All this stuff. And so Lilith is like, all right, so what do you want to do? And then Scarlet's like, I want a real duel. If you beat me in a real duel, I'll consider joining, right? Or I'll join officially. And it's like, all right, when do you want to do the rematch? And she's like, right now. And they're like, all right. So they both get ready. They both charge at each other. And Lilywise uppercuts her straight into the ceiling, knocking her out cold immediately. So it's like, all right. And the commander at that point walks in and is like, the fuck's going on here? A bit later, when Scarlet like comes to and is healed by Rapunzel, she's like, "Fine. Thank you all for taking me into the Goddess Squad. I appreciate it. I will do my best to fight with you guys." Still being unsatisfied with the duel, Scarlet then wants to establish a power hierarchy within the new squad that she has joined, or the old squad that she has now joined. And so she wants to have a duel with every single member so that they can establish who's the strongest and who's the weakest and whatnot. And so Lilith, as the captain of the squad, is like, sure, that sounds good, but the person you're challenging gets to decide the type of battle that you're the type of duel that you're going to be engaged in. She's going to start with Rapunzel, who's a supporter who heals, and Scarlet's like, the fuck are we going to do here? And so Rapunzel's challenge is who can pray the longest without falling asleep. And so they start praying. And it gets pretty silly. So they're just praying, like Red Hood comes and checks on them after like 2 hours. They're still doing good. 4 hours later, Doro comes and checks on them. They're both still awake. 6 hours later, Snow White comes in and is trying to like hide from the commander so she could like slurp noodles without being harassed. Fucking Snow White. And it looks like Scarlet's starting to struggle. I mean, Doro mentioned that she looked like she was struggling a little bit, but 6 hours of praying is pretty intense. And so finally, after Snow White leaves, Rapunzel's like, "Hey, Scarlet, wake up, you lost." The next challenge is Snow White. So what their duel is going to be is weapon assembly. And Scarlet thinks it's completely unfair in her favor because she has a sword. So taking her apart her sword is like a real quick, just like slide the thing back in the thing. I'm not a swordsmith, I don't know, but I think it's like the palm into the the palm into the pommel, or the blade into the handle into the palm, or whatever. And then versus Snow White, who has like a very advanced, like technologically advanced like gun. And so then Red Hood's like, "All right, we'll see about that." And Scarlet's like, "What do you mean?" And then Lilith is like, "Go." And then Snow White immediately is like, "Done." Scarlet's like, "What the fuck?" So that's 2. That's 0 for 2. She loses. Next up is Red Hood. So Red Hood wants to play hide and go seek. These fucking kids. Anyway, so Scarlet's going to close her eyes, count to 10. Oh no, she's going to wait a minute. Yeah, okay, that's right. She waits a minute, and then she has 10 minutes to find Red Hood and physically touch her, and that'll be the case. And so at some point, so Red Hood like scampers off, and then Lily Wise like pulls Scarlet aside for a little chat. She's like, "Hey, you really don't need to be like doing any of this stuff. You're already in the squad. It doesn't matter." And then Scarlet, despite like losing and being like chagrined about the whole situation, is, "No, I want to do this. I want to like prove my worth," and yada yada yada. And so she runs off, and she finds Red Hood pretty quick, like in a minute or two, and she's like, "Aha, I gotcha." And then Red Hood's like, "Do ya?" And she fires a sniper rifle at her. And so then Scarlet's like, "You can't do that." And Red Hood's like, "You bet your ass I can do it." And so then Scarlet keeps like diving from cover to cover, trying to get to Red Hood. Red Hood keeps sniping, calling her a coward and whatnot. And then finally Scarlet's like, "I gotta do this." So she like charges Red Hood to like cut through the bullets and stuff and get to her. And then Red Hood keeps firing and jumping back and all this stuff. And then they get like super excited because now they're having like a great time. And they play this game, and right before Scarlet's able to get up to like where Red Hood is at, Lily Wise declares that time's up. Red Hood is Scarlet's pretty upset that she lost again, but then her and Red Hood decide they're going to keep playing this bullet cutting game of theirs, and Lily Wise is like, "What? Please don't." And so they end up spending like the rest of the night doing this, just like bang, cut, running around and doing all that fun stuff. Last up is Doro, of course. And Doro like doesn't want to do it. She's like, "This is stupid. I don't want to be engaged in this at all." Whatever. And Scarlet's like, "Oh, good. Then I win because you forfeit." And then Doro's like, "What? I don't forfeit. Fuck you." Like, let's do this. But you decide. You can decide anything you want, and that's what we'll do. So Scarlet decides they're going to arm wrestle. And so they begin arm wrestling, and they're equally matched in strength. So they just kind of grunt and or Scarlet grunts and makes noises and is like exerting a lot of, and Doro's just sitting calmly, like nothing's going on at all, being like real Doro. But they're deadlocked, and this goes on for a few minutes and they're like teasing each other and taunting each other. And then Red Hood makes like a sensual, or like a, what would you call it? A body? She makes like a sexual joke, and then Red Hood gets distracted. Not Red Hood, sorry. Red Hood makes the joke. Doro gets distracted for a second, and then that moment of distraction, Scarlet's able to pin her arm down, which means she wins. She finally beats somebody. Hooray! Doro then like gives Red Hood like the like the, what is it, the eye of death, the, the death glare, and then storms out of the room. And Scarlet's so happy, but then she runs after Doro and comments about her physical prowess and how it's so good, and that she would love to teach Doro how to fight with a sword. And the Doro's like, gross, I would never fight with a sword. That's uneloquent and like all this shit. And then they get into a huge fight about that, which continues as we see in like the Red Ash like side story stuff. A bit later, it's time for battle. So they're in the airship, they're flying over, and it's like, all right, let's do this. And Scarlet's like, yeehaw! And like jumps the fuck out of this airship to go start fucking killing things. Then we kind of like flashback a little bit, and Lilywise is, we find that Lilywise had talked to all the members of the Goddess Squad, and they all said that Scarlet is very impressive. Like each one in their own way, like the way she handles herself, the way she fights, the way she's able to cut bullets, and even Doro was like shocked that like a fucking what did she call it? Like a souped up, mass produced model was able to like Doro had to use like her full strength against her, right? Which shouldn't have happened because Grim models are like the best. So Scarlet somehow is overcome, just like we'll get with Aid and Rappy later. Excuse me. And so they're all happy to have her there, and because of that, Lilywise is like, hey, let's take her out to combat and see what goes down and everything. And the commander taunts her a little bit, was like, sound good, let's do it, I trust your judgment. So then down on the battlefield, Scarlet's cleaving through all the raptures, and she's thinking about the melee squad and how she wished they could all be there with her, specifically Rose, her sister. But she gets pulled back into the present by Red Hood shouting at her about like taking all the kills. And then like she goes through all like Rapunzel's concerned to offer aid, Snow White's keen surveillance, and Doro's challenge to see who can net more raptures than between her and Scarlet and Doro, right? And she thinks about how her new comrades are different, but that she's going to live up to the reputation. What the fuck am I trying to say? The reputation. Fucking English. Goddamn. Sorry. The reputation. That the melee squad had, right? And that she's gonna they're here, the Goddess Squad is here to save humanity, and melee squad was there, and so she's going to live up to the reputation and carry forth like the spirit of fighting and everything else, and that she can celebrate the victory when they finally are able to reclaim the service for humanity. And that ends her Bond story. Okay, last up, Red Hood, and we kind of put Red Hood off from Red Ash because here in like 25-26, her Bond story takes place like during 26, which is like next week's video, the chapter 26 return. So it starts off and we're just camping out. Red Hood is there. We can't sleep, and she notices that we can't sleep, so she's like, "Oh hey, can't sleep." And we're like, "Yeah, what are you doing?" She's like, "I don't know, I just don't like sleeping." And then we asked about Doro. She's out walking around. So then we start talking about like the Goddess Squad and about how she's like a legend, and how she says something about like, don't worry, I'm going to set up a campfire, and if anything comes, I'll take care of it. And we say we trust her because we know about the goddesses. And she's like, well, what do you know about the goddesses? And we start to answer her that we don't know much because everything's been erased, but we know that they were like heroes from the first the initial Rapture invasion. At that point, Ein speaks up because Red Hood's like squeaky voice or whatever it's like woke her up, and she talks about how like a lot of information's been erased, but like they're legends among especially the Nikkes, and everyone believes in them and believes that they're heroes. And we talk about how like, oh hey, there are any movies that were made of us? Like no. How'd you find all this information out? That Rappy mentioned it to you? Because she had spoken to Rappy about it a few times, and we're like, no, actually, like the Pilgrims told us all about it. She's like, what? We're like, yeah, Snow White, Rapunzel, and Scarlet. And so she's like, oh my goodness. And then at that point, Neon is like woken up, and they all get kind of giddy because Red Hood's going to tell us like some fun stories about their adventures. At that point, Red Hood explains the Grimm's model situation, and she actually mentions that the Grimm's models, which the goddesses were all built upon, were not actually the first like quote unquote Nikkes or the first technology. That there was the prototype. Of course, she's talking about Lilith, but that there was somebody else who maybe you couldn't even call them a Nikke. So technically, the Grimm's models were the first Nikkes, like Doro, Rapunzel, Red Hood, and Snow White were like the first Nikkes ever created. But their technology was based upon this prototype, which is Lilith, right? She doesn't say Lilith specifically. She just talks about this prototype. And that the whole thing was kind of crazy. And at some point, because it was just like an amalgamation of like different concepts and parts and pieces of like the technology they got from like the prototype from Lilith. And so it was kind of ramshackle. And that these Grimm's models they're called the Grimm's models because they're based on fairy tales, because fairy tales have happy endings. And so the concept was that, like, hey, if we name after these fairy tales, and hopefully, like, they will lead to, like, a happy ending with, like, humans reclaiming the surface and fighting off the raptures and whatnot. And, and then Ines asks a question about, like, well, how were you guys chosen? Because at some point Redhead mentions that there was, like, so it was because of, like, the ramshackle nature, it was only certain people, and then Red Hood's just like, it was only based upon, like, physical capability, and that originally, like, none of them got along because they were all vastly different personalities. But eventually they started, and that problem became even worse when Scarlet joined. And we know Scarlet from this event is actually a mass-produced Nikke, right? She's not a Grimm's model. And so you had a non-Grimm's model, and then all these Grimm's models, and, like, this whole hodgepodge of, like, random personalities. And we see all this in Red Ash if you go back to that event when I talk about that, especially in the mini game kind of unlocks, is how, like, all the contrasting personalities and all the kind of, like, not like intense infighting, but just people did not get along very well. But eventually they all learned how to get along. And then she shares this event where they went and, like, saved this family, and the family called them, like, the goddesses of victory, and were, like, so pleased with them. And at that point they were able to kind of, like, start coalescing into, like, a fighting force that actually worked together and didn't just kind of, like, exist as separate entities. Einstein gets mad a little bit because Red Hood is, like, talking about all these cool, fun adventures they had and not going into any details whatsoever. So she demands more details and, like, a better story. Red Hood then gets into how things were. Like, there was an eon of despair. Like, when the raptures came, they were considered to be, like, a force of nature that no one was able to stop. And no matter what they threw at the raptures, bombs, missiles, tanks, whatever, nothing seemed to even slow them down. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this, like, squad of Nikkes was able to, like, roll in there and just, like, get victory after victory after victory, and they became, like, a shining light. And Red Hood talks about, like, they would come back from missions, and there'd be, like, hundreds, if not thousands, of people, like, singing their praises and, like, throwing rose petals on the ground for them to walk over. And, like, she said it was pretty rad. And so... and because they were seen as, like, the last hope, the goddesses of victory, all this kind of stuff. And because not even other, like, the mass-produced Nikke squads or, like, other groups were able to do anything. It was just them versus, like, all the raptures. And then Ainz kind of brings the mood down, talking about how, like, well, that's not enough. One squad's not nearly enough. And Red Hood's like, yeah, it wasn't enough. Like, there was no way. Like, the one thing it did seem to do was give people hope so that they would push harder and strive for better and do something, right? Instead of just giving up completely to despair. And then we talk about how, like, what they did was super important for the salvation of mankind, because, again, it's like the hope is so important. And because they were able to instill hope in mankind that there was going to be a future and that there was a possibility to push back the raptor horde, that it wasn't just, like, a force of nature that you can't stop. That allowed people to, like, invest in, like, the Ark and, like, more Nikkes and, like, continue on. It's been 100 years and, like, humanity still exists, like, not purely, but be great from this, like, from the goddesses of victory, right? From their example and their existence and their victories, like, that really carried forward pretty heavily into their ability. And then as we're talking about the Ark, Red Hood gets curious about it, and she talks about how she's never been to the Ark. She was not familiar with it. She just, like, at the beginning of, like, the Ark's defense, like, when they were finishing it up, and she was there, but because of, like, personal reasons, which is, like, the corruption and everything that we already know about, she wasn't able to stick around for very long. But she knows that the rest of the squad, like Doro, Scarlet, Rapunzel, and Snow White, stuck around to the very end. And then so she gets very curious about the Ark because, all the sacrifice and everything. Like, what's it like? How are people living? Like, what's going on with all that? So Neon starts by kind of explaining the structure of the Ark, how it's cramped and crowded, but it's super safe, how Nikkes and humans, like, interact together and all this stuff, and how, there's, like, Splendimen, and there's tons of food, tons of music, there's Nikkes who produce music, kind of, like, highlighting all the good aspects of the Ark. And then Ainz, who's, like, a pessimist, she starts highlighting all the negative aspects, like the crime, how people are, like, hedonistic, how they're kind of spoiled, how they just let the Nikkes do all the hard work, and so they live these very, like, decadent lifestyles that aren't, like, helpful to other people, how they'll turn their eyes away from crime and not do anything about it and whatnot. And then Red Hood kind of grills her about, like, well, you seem to care about changing the Ark and stuff, so there must be others as well. And then Ainz is like, I'm just like a fly in the ointment, essentially. Like, no one's going to take my opinion for matters and all this stuff. And then finally, she's like, so I've heard, like, a lot of good and bad stuff. What do you guys think? Do you think it was worth the sacrifice the goddesses made to have the Ark? And Neon and Ainz both agree that yes, it was worth their sacrifice, and that it is a place that humanity has survived and somewhat thrived and moved forward, and that it's a jumping off place to like recapture the surface. And that Red Hood like appreciates that they told her about the arc and that their thoughts and feelings about it generally. After all this, Red Hood gets a little quiet and we just kind of hang out for a little bit, and then she mentions she just wants to go think about some stuff on her own. After she's gone for a little bit, Ainz encourages us to go chat with her and make sure she's doing okay. So we catch up with her and we kind of fill her in on the pilgrims. So we talk about how Snow White is like a super glutton, but that she's a great leader, and that though she's not like a fun and playful person necessarily anymore, that she still has some humor to her, and that she's doing a great job leading the pilgrims and fighting the good fight and doing all that stuff. We talk about how Rapunzel is super horny all the time, which Red Hood's like, yes! Like fucking Red Hood. And then we talk about Scarlet's like a calm, peaceful farmer, and that she just like she's a great fighter still, but that she spends all her time like farming and drinking and like enjoying like the good life and just like peace and quiet, which is way different than Scarlet was when before. She's much more like chill and calm. And then we talk about how like we didn't know anything about them before they had like their 500 mind switches and became the Pilgrims versus the Goddess Squad, but they all seem like they're doing well, and that the changes seem good because they're embracing who they really are and everything, and that makes Red Hood very happy. And we mentioned like calling them up so they can come talk to Red Hood, and she's like, no, it's already hard enough to like, I've lived a good life. I know what it's like to live a good life and a full life, and I want Rappy to feel the same way and have a good life, so I don't want to interfere with that. I don't want anything to get in the way, so I appreciate it, but no. But thank you for like sharing all this stuff and whatnot. And then she encourages us that we should live a good life and embrace everything and just make sure that we're doing what we need to do, and we mentioned that we will. And that ends her Bond story. So go ahead and like, share, subscribe, and comment, and I will catch you guys next week for the actual main campaign story where this takes place, and then the week after that for the Chime and Crown experience in Last Kingdom. So talk to you later. Bye.